And I hope that they can come by more often. We'll see. Today I will be in Genesis, and we'll be resuming our sermon series after Pastor Miller did Psalm 13. But just as a reminder, our website's here if you need to have access to our prayer meetings or just to find our sermons online, just UJB.church. That's our URL, and that will take you right there. There might be some upcoming changes that Mr. Poyer will talk about, and so those things will also be posted on our website. This is our 18th part in this series, and we have been in the book of Genesis, and we'll go through parts of the book of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and we'll also go through different parts of 1 Kings, 2 Kings, Chronicles, some of the prophets, until we get to Christ, because the story is ultimately about him. Every story in Scripture points at, is building up to Christ, including today's story, very much so. Well, what is the story? We may not know much about God, and we don't. The Bible does tell us everything we need to know, but still, it's just the smallest amount of information. We don't really know all of God's story, but we do know our story with him and how we're involved. What is the point of it, though? What's the point of the story? Well, why does it have to exist in the first place? What is God doing? I hope you think about that sometimes, or else I don't know what question you might have, but I hope you have that one. Like, what is God doing? What is the point of all of this? And I don't pretend to have all the answers, and no one really does. But we do get to see a glimpse of it. And that's why we're going through the Bible the way we are chronologically, because God reveals himself to us in stages. And often we just skip right to something in the New Testament, and we have this kind of bizarre idea of God. But if you skip Genesis, if you skip the Pentateuch, if you skip the histories, if you skip the prophets, if you skip the Psalms and even Proverbs, we're having a very skewed, inaccurate view of God. Because I think that God is not what we expect. God is surprising. So I find that people will either be on like one side or the other in their view of God. We tend to be on one side or the other. One view is that God is, some people might be here. Maybe it's their personality, maybe it's their upbringing, maybe it could be any number of things, but they might say God is just tender and loving and kind and always forgiving, and that's true. And the way they approach God is that way. Maybe in their mind, God is like some old kind of grandfatherly figure in heaven who's always smiling, like benevolently at us. And on the other side, there are those who might understand God as severe and maybe even unforgiving and angry all the time. So there's people who tend to be on one or the other naturally, and hopefully they come towards a more accurate view over time. But people tend to be here or here. But God is not quite either of those, though both of those have a lot of truth to them. And in this particular chapter, really both chapters, 18 and 19, they're meant to be read together. It's one story, 18 and 19. It's sort of like one pericope. It's one reading. Here you get to really meet God. And it's the longest recorded 24 hours that we have of Abraham. We have like 24 hours of Abraham's life in greater detail than any other place in Abraham's life. There's a lot of detail here. There's a lot of things that you learn about God in just these two chapters. And I think if you don't understand what's going on here with God, I think that really you miss something. So this chapter in 18 and 19 is getting a real balanced look at what God's like. It's done in 11 scenes, like in a play. Like there's like scene 1, scene 2, scene 3. It's done in 11 scenes, and we won't go into the detail all of that. It's more like a Bible study kind of thing to consider. But it's done in these kind of 11 scenes, and each scene is like leading up to a point. So, thinking of all of that, and what is God actually like? Going back to the question of what is God like even doing here in this story? What is God doing? Why is he doing it? And here's the answer. And it might seem weird, but his goal, as far as we are concerned, is to simply live with us. His goal is to be united with people. I mean, you just go to the end of the Bible. What is God doing? He's living among his people. And what can't God do in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15? He can't really live with Adam and Eve in the same way. Not exactly. He wants to spend his time with them, but he can't. He makes them leave. He makes them go out. Because what they've done is contrary to his nature, his identity. You see, God must destroy sin. He must. He can't allow it to exist forever. He has patience, and he'll wait, and he'll wait, and he'll wait. But eventually, he has to stop it. And his stopping it is terrifying. He has to remove it from his presence. But that's exactly what God doesn't want to do. He doesn't want to remove us from his presence. He wants to have us in his presence. He wants to live among us. The whole Bible is answering that question, is how can God live among us? This is where you have that covenant with Abraham we looked at. Really, the covenant that he made with Adam, and the covenant he made with Noah, and the covenant he made with Abraham a few weeks ago, and soon the covenant with Abraham's descendants, and then with David, and then the new covenant, which we're going to celebrate today with the communion. This is God's goal, to live among us, not just in our hearts, not just indwelling us with the Spirit, but to walk with us. That's what he wants to do, but he can't. And we'll see why here when we hear the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where the three visit. You have two angels, and one that is either Christ himself or an angel representing God. You will notice that the two angels go to the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, but the third one does not go there. He stays away. And the assumption is, by scholars for years and years, that if he goes, he will destroy it. There is no chance, because he is holy. He cannot go there without it destroying it. God is a number of things. And you're going to see two of them very, very clearly here. One, God is absolutely the judge, and he is terrifying. And I mean that. But he is also willing to do anything to prevent judgment, including, as we know, as we looked at Easter just a few weeks ago, he's willing that he himself die so that we don't have to experience judgment. He is the Father who hates evil. He is the Father who sees it and needs to destroy it because he's holy. But he would sacrifice his life in an instant so that you don't have to experience it. It's that balance. We often say that, and I've said this a lot, the fear of God. We say that like the fear of God just means respect, and that's kind of true, right? But think about it. Like, why is it that we respect fire when you turn the stove on? Why is it that you respect the sharp knife? Is because you know what it does. It's dangerous. Sure, the fear of God is respect, but what does that mean? God is the judge. He doesn't play around. And yet, he would allow himself to be judged so that you don't have to be. There's no wilder, I don't know, you can't call God a creature, but there's nothing like him. Nothing. He is not tame. He is not the old grandfatherly figure in the clouds. He's surprising. He's shocking. And if you just read, and I hope you do, I hope you learn to fall in love with the scriptures and read them for yourself. Because if you just read what he writes, it's unbelievable. He's so strange. It's so beautiful. This is the most documented 24 hours of Abraham's life that we have. And it's not what you will expect. It is odd. It's fascinating. You'll find that God is fierce, but he's also gentle, surprisingly gentle. At the same time, he's hard as iron. And yet, other times, unexpectedly flexible, unexpectedly soft. It's bizarre. He's non-negotiating, and yet willing to negotiate. I hope you see it. Meeting God. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent during the hottest time of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing across from him. He doesn't quite know who they are, but something in his mind is clicking, saying, there's something different here. So he's going to do a number of things. You're going to notice him hurrying around to serve them. That's hurrying. He's scurrying everywhere. In Middle Eastern culture, hospitality is a big deal. And it's way bigger deal than our cultures. To be a bad host would be to be a bad human. And it's very important to be very kind and very serving to anyone who comes. But he doesn't just treat them well. He calls them Lord. He recognizes there's something different about them. And by the time you get to verse 16, he knows there's more than something special going on with one of them in particular. One of these men. When he saw them, he ran, and you'll see a lot of hurrying words, from the entrance of his tent. This old, this guy's like a century old, okay? Imagine running. Ran from the entrance of his tent to meet them, and he bowed low to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by and leave your servant. Let a little water be brought so that you all may wash your face and rest under the tree. And let me get a bit of food so that you may refresh yourselves since you have passed by your servant's home. After that," Abraham continues, "you may be on your way." "All right," they replied. "You may do as you say." So Abraham hurried into the tent and said to Sarah, "Quick, take 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread." Then Abraham ran to the herd and chose a fine, tender calf, gave it to his servant, who quickly prepared it. Abraham then took curds and milk along with the calf that had been prepared and placed the food before them. They ate while he was standing near them under a tree. Then they asked him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" It's a rhetorical question. They know where she is. He replied, "She's just right there in the tent." One of them said, "I will surely return to you," and this is where they are obviously not just men. "I will return to you when the season comes round again, and your wife Sarah will have a son." Now, Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, not far behind him. Abraham and Sarah were old and advancing in years. Sarah had long since passed menopause. So, Sarah, thinking to herself, laughed, thinking, After I am worn out, will I have pleasure, especially when my husband is old too?" She's not laughing a happy laugh. She's not laughing an arrogant laugh. She's laughing out of a lifetime of despair. This has been her shame for as long as she's lived, several decades. This has been her one thing that she can't get over. This has been the one thing that people whispered behind her back. This is the reason why sometimes that she's nasty and mean. This is what bugs her particularly. This is what eats at her. She's laughing out of embarrassment, disappointment. Disappointment with herself. I mean, she knows it's not her husband's issue because Hagar had a child with her husband. She knows it's because of her. She's probably disappointed with herself, even though it's not her fault. And she's disappointed with definitely her situation, and maybe she's even disappointed with God. She doesn't have the energy or the patience to hope for, silly things like having a child when you're this old. When you're the age of a great-grandmother, she knows this is a silly thing. Her unbelief is based on hopelessness. Maybe you've been there before. It's not based on pride. But God's response to her is surprisingly gentle. God doesn't always answer gently because he knows how she is hurt. The Lord said to Abraham, but really, he's speaking to Sarah. Why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child when I am old? Is anything impossible? Another translation might say, is anything too wonderful for the Lord? I will return to you when the season comes around again, and Sarah will have a son. Then Sarah lied and said, I did not laugh, which in Hebrew is an anagram of the name Isaac, because she was afraid. But the Lord said, no, you did laugh. When the men got up to leave, they looked out over Sodom. Because where they are, you can look out and see Sodom in the valley below. Now, Abram was walking with them to see them on their way. Now, remember at this point, chapters ago, Lot had chosen to live in the very wealthy, lush, green valley where Sodom was. It's wealthy people. It's, of course, today famous for degenerate behavior. It was famous then for degenerate behavior, too. You see, in the ancient Middle East, homosexuality wasn't necessarily condemned, but there are no children in the room today, really. But homosexual rape was very much condemned by ancient cultures. It was a crime, pretty much in every ancient Middle Eastern culture in the area. By the world standards, this area was not acceptable. Now, the practice of homosexuality in general, with or without rape, is not compatible with what God desires for us to do. He doesn't accept it. When Lot went to go live in Sodom, he's making a number of choices that, as you will see, affect his family very seriously. Then the Lord said, and this is a weird divine counsel moment, much like you see in Genesis 3, where God speaks to himself. We assume that it's talking to the members of the Trinity. And you see it with Noah, where God speaks to himself when he talks to Noah. And now we see it again, where God is kind of talking himself to himself. Should I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? And Abraham's right there. After all, God says to himself, Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all the nations on the earth will pronounce blessings on one another using his name, just like he said in Genesis 12:3. I have chosen him, God continues talking to himself, so that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just. So, why is God doing anything in these chapters right here? Why does God could do this without talking to Abraham. God could just go to Sodom and do what he's going to do without interacting with Abraham at all. The reason why God's going to tell Abraham is he's wants to have a teaching moment. A nation will come from Abraham. God has guaranteed it. And he wants Abraham to know the end result of a nation corrupting itself. He's telling him because he's going to have a nation. Then the Lord will give to Abraham what he promised him. So the Lord said, the outcry. The outcry is like the idea of people screaming out to God or just screaming out injustice. And God apparently listens. We hear this throughout Scripture, that when people scream out to God about injustice, whether they know him or don't know him, he listens. So whatever's happening in this city, people are screaming out to God or just screaming out in frustration. There's terrible things happening here. We've experienced tragedy. The Lord said, this outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sins so blatant that I must go down and see if they are wicked as the outcry suggests. If not, I want to know. The two men turned, but not the third. The one that's speaking doesn't go down there. The two men do, and they head towards Sodom. But Abraham was standing before the Lord. Abraham approached and said, he knows what's going to happen. If he recognizes this is either God himself speaking to me or an angel directly, the representative of God is right here. And scholars go either way. Is it the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, means before Jesus Christ was born of the Virgin Mary? Is it the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ, or is it an angel who is the representative of God? It doesn't particularly matter as far as interpretation. Either way, this is God on earth. Abraham knows if those two men, who he now assumes are angels, if they go down to that city, he knows that city is done. It's over. That city won't survive. But Abraham is loyal to his family. We've already seen him rescue Lot from the kings that came and conquered this city. We know that he would do anything to save his family. Abraham approached and said, will you sweep away the godly along with the wicked? And what if, Abraham continues, what if there are 50 godly people in the city? Abraham knows there's not 50 people. He knows that city. That city has got one godly person, and that's a carnal believer. Means it, in the New Testament talks about carnal believers, those who believe, but their lifestyle isn't super reflective of their salvation. It's a dangerous place to be. He knows there's just one godly person, but he's going to negotiate with God. And what's wild is God interacts with him. This is really bizarre. You would think that God would just be like, no, very clearly, but he just interacts and negotiates. What if there are 50 godly people in the city? Will you really wipe it out and not spare the place for the sake of 50 godly people who are in it? Far be it from you, God, to do such a thing, to kill the godly with the wicked, treating the godly and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of the whole earth do what is right? So the Lord replied, if I find in the city of Sodom 50 godly people, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Then Abraham asked, since I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, although I am but dust and ashes, what if there are 5 less than 50 godly people? Will you destroy the whole city because of 5 lacking? God replied, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. Abraham just keeps going. What if 40 are found there? He replied, I will not do it for the sake of 40. Then Abraham replied, may the Lord not be so angry that I may speak. What if 30 are found there? He replied, I will not do it if I find 30. Abraham keeps going. Since I have undertaken to speak to the Lord, what if only 20 are found there? He replied, I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. Finally, Abraham said, may the Lord not be angry so that I may speak just once more. What if 10 and there are not? What if 10 are found there? He replied, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. Abraham doesn't dare ask anymore. The Lord went on his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham. Then Abraham returned home, probably with a heavy heart, knowing that there are not 10. The two angels, now the text identifies them, the two men, came to Sodom in the evening while Lot was sitting in the city's gateway. Note that to sit in the gateway has meaning. When Lot saw them, he sees these two. He's a good man. He is a foolish one. He got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. Now, when I say he's at the city's gateway, in the ancient Middle Eastern land of Canaan, those who sat at the gate of a city were sort of the elders of the city who made decisions. In some cases, they made judgments over what should be done about crimes or different decisions that they were faced with. So Lot is not just living near the city like he was. He's now moved into the city, and now he's a leader of the city. So he is deep in it. Now, I want to remind you that the Bible describes Lot as righteous. In 2 Peter 2, the Apostle Peter wrote, "And if God rescued Lot, a righteous man, who was distressed." So apparently Lot was distressed by the depraved conduct of the people in his city. He goes on saying, "For that righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard." I hope that, here's the thing, we do. I was going to say, I hope that we don't find ourselves there, but we do. When you find yourselves there, wake up. It's going to happen to you a lot in life. You leave the city. Leave whatever it is that you're trapped in. But Lot was there. Lot continues, though, in chapter 19. "Here, my lords, please turn aside." He's trying to be a good host. "Please turn aside to your servant's house. Stay the night and wash your feet. Then you can be on your way early in the morning." The angels reply, "No, we'll spend the night in the town square." We've heard the cries of the anguished. We've heard the cries of people coming up. We want to investigate what is really happening here. God doesn't judge casually. But Lot urged them persistently. So they turned aside with him and entered his house. And you'll see why he's persistent, because he knows the men of his city. He prepared a feast for them, including bread baked without yeast, and they ate. Before they could lie down and sleep, all the men, both young and old, from every part of the city of Sodom, surrounded the house. So they're eating, and you could hear all the men of the city. All doesn't mean every single one, but it means basically the majority of the city. And cities back then aren't thousands of people. Please understand. Cities back then, if you go and study them, they're small. Even the armies back then also, they weren't like, we imagine like modern day armies with hundreds of thousands of people. Not so. They're much smaller. So you can imagine like what we might consider a village, but they would consider a city. Okay? That all the men are coming to this house and surrounding it. These men outside the house shout to the inside of the house, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." Lot went outside to them, shutting the door behind him, trying to protect the people in his house. He said, "No, my brothers, don't act so wickedly. Look, I have 2 daughters who have never had sexual relations with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do to them whatever you please. Only don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." If you end up in this situation, guys, it's time to run. You should have ran already. The men outside scream, "Out of our way. This man came to live here as a foreigner, Lot. He's not even a local. And now he dares to judge us? We'll do more harm to you than to them." Then they kept pressing in on Lot until they were close enough to break down the door. So the men inside reached out and they pulled Lot back into the house as they shut the door. Then they struck the men who were at the door of the house, from the youngest to the oldest with blindness. The men outside wore themselves out, still blind, still can't see, still trying to get in. Then the two visitors said to Lot, in their mind, this, if you go and you look at the 11 scenes in this story, this is the center scene. This is the one, this is the sixth scene where it's over. The angels have decided it's done. The city's game over. Who else do you have here? Do you have any sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or any relatives in the city? Get them out of this place because we are about to destroy it. The outcry against this place is so great before the Lord that he has sent us to destroy it. Then Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who were going to marry his daughters. He said, quick, get out of this place because the Lord is about to destroy the city. But his sons-in-law thought he was joking, ridiculing them. At dawn, the angels hurried Lot along, saying, get going, take your wife, take your two daughters who are here, or else you will be destroyed when the city is judged. When Lot, oddly, hesitated, the men grabbed his hand forcefully. They're taking him and the hands of his wife and two daughters because the Lord had compassion on them. Again, God is surprising. At this point, I'd be like, oh, see ya. You're done. But no, God has compassion on these two. He didn't have to save them. He said 10. God made an arrangement with the mediator, Abraham, to just save if it was 10. But God said, no, I will save them anyway. When the Bible describes Lot as righteous, what they're talking about is he believes. Righteousness comes because of faith. God rescues this one because he believes, even though he does not believe so well. They led them away and placed them outside the city. When they had brought them outside, these angels said, run for your lives. Don't look behind you or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the mountains or you will be destroyed. But Lot said to them, no, please, Lord. Lot says, your servant, me, if I found favor with you, and you have shown me great kindness by sparing my life, but I am not able to escape to the mountains, because this disaster will overtake me and I'll die. And you see again, Lot is not Abram. He's not Sarah. Look, this town over here is close enough to escape to. This little close nearby town, Zoar. It's just a little one, he says. Let me go there. It's just a little place, isn't it? Then I'll survive. He's like, I'm not willing to live all these cities and towns behind. I don't want to go live like Abram up in the hills. Just let me go there. Very well, the angel replied. I will grant this request too. Again, how much negotiating and willing to accept failure has God done here? It's unbelievable. I mean, like, you see this now, right? I hope you see it. God is not playing at all. There's no playing. He is terrifying. And yet, at the same time over here, all right, well, okay, I'll change a little bit. You can go there. I mean, do you see? If you don't understand, I think, Genesis, I don't think you can understand something about God. He's not expected. Run there quickly, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there. This incident explains why the town was called Zoar. The sun had just risen over the land as Lot reached Zoar. Then the Lord rained down sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah. It was sent down from the sky by the Lord. So he overthrew those cities and all that region, including all the inhabitants of the cities and the vegetation that grew from the ground. But Lot's wife looked back longingly and was turned into a pillar of salt, meaning she was covered with whatever God was unleashing on this city. Abraham got up early in the morning and went to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He gets up, and again, he can see the city down below. He goes and he gets up early, probably thinking about it all night, and he sees what really he expected to see. He looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah and all the land of that region, As he did so, he saw the smoke unexpectedly rising up from the land like smoke from a furnace. So when God destroyed the cities of the region, God honored Abram's request. He removed Lot from the midst of the destruction when he had destroyed the cities Lot had lived in. Lot went up from Zoar with his 2 daughters and settled in the mountains there because he was afraid to live in Zoar. I mean, imagine, he's lost everything. He was wealthy, like legitimately rich. He has nothing. He's starting with nothing. The only thing he has is 2 daughters. And this part of the story, it doesn't play out in a day or two like it did when I was in my mind when I was a kid. This is describing the path of his life afterwards. So we don't know how long he was in Zoar, but obviously he's that guy, and he doesn't want to be there. He's probably embarrassed. He's humiliated. He's impoverished. He has nothing, and he doesn't really trust God with his future. There's a lot of parallels between Noah's failure and Lot's failure, and it would take more time to go into than we have, but they both get drunk, they both are despairing, and both something inappropriate happens with their children. But in Lot's case, it is far more severe. Lot went up from Zoar with his 2 daughters and settled in the mountains because he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave. Can you believe it? Not necessary. He could have went back to Abraham. He lived in a cave with his 2 daughters in shame and despair. Later, the older daughter said to the younger, I mean, their dad has nothing. Believe me, and I'm not trying to defend them, what they're going to do is horrible. But it might not be exactly what you think in the ancient world. I mean, the names of the children that come from this incestuous relationship are names of pride. The 2 names they give their children, the meaning of the names denote the pride that these come from the father. They're not embarrassed. Their minds have been twisted and ruined by living in that city, but at the same time, they have no hope for marrying in their own opinion. It's over. Their father has nothing. They are beggars, basically, living in caves. Their fathers are drunk. They have no future, and they don't know who God is, apparently. They definitely don't trust him, and they have no interest in living in God's way, and they take their life in their own hands. They want children. Our father is old, and there is no man anywhere nearby to have sexual relations with us, because they want kids, according to the way of the world. Come, let's make our father drunk with wine so we can have sexual relations with him and preserve, and this is their reason, to preserve our family line through our father. So that night they made their father drunk with wine. The older daughter came and had sexual relations with her father, but he was not aware that she had sexual relations with him because he's so drunk, and then got up. The next morning, the older daughter said to the younger, since I had sexual relations with my father last night, let's make him drunk again tonight. Then you go and have sexual relations with him so that we can preserve our family line through our father. So they made their father drunk that night as well. And the younger one came and had sexual relations with him. But he was so drunk that he was not aware that she had sexual relations with him and then got up. In this way, both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. This is the end result of a lot of poor choices by Lot. The older daughter gave birth to a son and named him Moab. He is the ancestor of the Moabites today. The younger daughter also gave birth to a son and named him Ben-Ami. He is the ancestor of the Ammonites today. 4 things are certain. That's how the story ends. It's like that. I want you to just think about it. It's not going to be in the slides, but what the story start with? It started with God promising in chapter 18 that Sarah would have an impossible child and that God's faithfulness would guarantee it. And they believed it. Not perfectly, but they believed it. No one's perfect in the story except God. Lot, another one considered righteous because of faith, the result of his carnal life, horrible choices, which you as a Christian are free to make those horrible choices. You have the freedom to make choices. You as a Christian can make these kind of choices. And we never see what it's going to look like in 30 years later. It starts out small. And the end result is very different than the child that would be born to Sarah and Abraham. We have children of incest. These children of incest, their descendants would be a plague on Israel. 4 things are certain, though. Sin has ruined the world, and all people experience its destruction, all of us, whether righteous or unrighteous. 2, the unrighteous will be separated from God in judgment when Christ returns. I mean, Christ is absolutely willing to die to save us, and he did. Our Creator died to save us. Jesus Christ was there at creation with God the Father and God the Spirit. Made us. We rejected him. We did evil, things that he cannot accept, and yet he died so that we don't have to. But just like this story, just as God is compassionate and will do anything to save you, there is judgment, and he doesn't play around. 3, the righteous will be present with the Lord at death. Those who are righteous, again, that means they've been justified by faith and will physically live in the new earth when Christ returns, which is God's ultimate goal with us. 4, Christians, those whom Christ has given righteousness, because we have been given it as we studied in Romans. It's a gift. We can make choices that damage families, our families. We can make choices that damage our descendants, our communities, and even our nation. And I think we all could think of examples of each of those cases. And here's the thing. You've already made choices like that. So have I. We've already made choices that have, to some extent, hurt our families. And all of you have. If you have a family, you've made a choice that's hurt your family. If you have descendants, you've already, at some point rubbed off on them the wrong way. And at some point, you've hurt your community. We all have. I don't know exactly what you've done. I only know me. But we have all done this to some extent. And honestly, so did Abraham. But if you catch yourself doing it, stop. Don't go as far as Lot did. You make yourself stop before you really hurt people, before you really affect everyone around you. These choices start in the heart with Lot wanting what was beautiful, taking what maybe he shouldn't have even had. And like him, we begin to act on what is, in there. Maybe it's wanting something that isn't ours. Maybe, frankly, that's almost always what it is. Maybe it's despairing over something that we feel like we deserved. Maybe we have an illness and we can't understand why we have to suffer with this. Maybe we have a family issue and we wonder why this happened to me. The choices we make because of those things, and they grow. And if you don't watch out, they get bigger and bigger and bigger. Our choices usually start small, but if our choices are going in the wrong direction, the more it hurts those we love. Instead of suffering through our own poor choices, why don't we instead follow Abraham and Sarah as a better example? They accepted a simpler lifestyle. They made mistakes like you and I, but they mostly, definitely not always, depended on God. Because of that, their children did not inherit. They did inherit their parents' problems. Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 that came from Jacob, they certainly inherited problems from their parents. But not like Lot's daughters. My goodness. It can be worse. So if you've already messed up and made some poor choices, It doesn't have to be that bad. God will keep pursuing you. How does this fit in the big story, though? God has elected a people through which he would bless the world. It's the descendants of Abraham. These people whose this book was wrote to, remember, this book was collected and put together by Moses and really the team that worked with him. This is put together, this is recorded so that Israel, the descendants of Abraham, would know the end result of sin. And that's why you got to hear the internal monologue of God saying, should I tell this to Abraham? Well, he's going to have a whole nation coming from him. He needs to know what happens. He needs to know the end result of a culture, a civilization, a people group rejecting God this far. He needs to know. God wanted Israel to know about this. They needed to know the end result of sin, destruction and unwavering, severe judgment. But while God is that serious and honestly that terrifying, at the same time, he's merciful, as he was to Sarah in her unbelief, as he was to Lot. He's even shockingly gentle. God was willing to offer mercy to any righteous living among the cities. Any of those are righteous, I'll give them mercy, even if they've screwed up terribly. Even if they're as far gone as Lot and his family, I still will offer them. And there's none of us who are as far gone as Lot and his family. None of us are that far gone. But even to Lot, I will offer this mercy. That doesn't mean Lot escaped all consequence. I mean, like, he messed his family up. But God was still willing to reach out to him. It is God's grace that's the basis for salvation. Obviously, it can't be behavior, because Lot would have been destroyed long before. God was willing to listen to Abraham and change the outcome. He's willing to change the outcome based on Abraham's intercession. God was willing to listen to Lot even and change the outcome based on his request. God was going to destroy Zoar too. And he said, can I go to Zoar? Oh, all right, go. That's wild. That's not how I grew up thinking about God. I grew up the other way. I don't know which side you grew up on. I grew up on the God is severe, terrifying, and he's going to kill me. All right? That's how I grew up. That's not all wrong. And some people grow up over here. God will accept anything I do. Well, some people grow up there, but he's not really quite that. God is loving no matter what. But neither of those are quite true. That's why you have to know your Old Testament. I think we want to experience God, but sometimes you just need to read the text because he tells you what he's like. God is not willing to allow evil to continue unchecked. And that's why you're here. That's why the church is here. That's why I don't mean like Uijeongbu Community Church, though us too. This is why the worldwide church is here. We're meant to go out to a world that is at varying levels of brokenness. But it's all broken, and we're broken too. But God's Spirit lives within us, and he is pleased with us because his Spirit is in us. Because of that, he loves us. He won't abandon us. He will always accept us. But that doesn't mean there are no consequences. There surely are, as we see with Lot. But we are to go out to the world and be his kingdom of priests, as it says in the New Testament, to represent him, to point people towards Christ, and especially those who are younger than you in the faith. As our series purpose statement says, we want the whole next generation to know about this God. It's what they're looking for. You can hear it in music. You can hear it in the philosophy they have. You can hear it in everything they're looking for. People, I think they know it. They know there's something missing. They see the silliness behind everything we're doing. They see the silliness behind working yourself to death and trying to be successful. They see the silliness behind trying, to be, loved on social media. They see the people these days, the world around you, they know that something is off. And they want to know something real. Something that isn't like fake. They don't want to see this one or this one. They want to see that perfect being. They want it. They might not know exactly what flavor it is they're after, but they know it's out there. And that's what we are to tell them, to give them a balanced view, to represent a balanced view of who God is. He hates sin, and he is terrifying. And yet he will, in an instant, sacrifice his life so that you don't ever have to experience any of that. That's the God we represent. He's incredibly kind and loving and gracious. And yet he does not accept evil at all. So that's what we share with the next generation. There is a God like that who wants to fix the world that they know is broken. And he means to do it permanently, for real. And he isn't playing around. I think the world wants to know that in their heart. But they will resist. The devil's lies, it sounds very hokey and like some, backwoods country church kind of thing that the devil's lying to people, but he is. He's convinced everyone that there is no hope, that you might as well just enjoy yourself. He's convinced them that God is either over here and he's some kind of monster, or that God is over here and that he'll just accept anything, or that there is no God. An idea that is slowly disappearing, actually. More people today are spiritual than ever before. Not Christian, but spiritual. People are more and more thinking there is something out there. They're not labeling it as God, but they think there's something out there. It's our job to try to communicate it with our actions and maybe even our words. That there is a God who will come and who will judge, but will do anything to save us from judgment. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord God, it's a long sermon, but these two chapters have to, I think, go together mentally. And maybe it's too much and maybe it's too long, but pray that we can understand you a little bit better. And we can't pretend to actually know you really. You're so much more than us, but we can at least know some part of your nature. It's just in our Bibles, right there in our own language. Pray that we can understand it. I pray that we would want to read it and know you. Pray, Lord, that you would use us to reach the next generation. Pray this in Christ's name. Amen.